Joe King walks out on stage and says, "Hello, yes, my name's Joe King. I'm not joking, though I prefer to be called Juris Dr. King. Okay, the writer's strike is still ongoing, and one of the sticking points is the role of artificial intelligence, with some writers being concerned about AI potentially taking their jobs. So anyway, as I've done in previous episodes, I decided to ask Google's AI chatbot Bard a few questions to see how up to snuff it really is. I specifically asked it about certain animals getting vaccinated for COVID. Now let me say here at the Joe King Show, we recommend everyone get vaxxed. If you haven't yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. Go get waxed and vaxxed. But anyway, this is about asking Bard whether certain animals should get vaxxed. For dogs, Bard said, while there's no current recommendation to get dogs vaccinated, it did say that some veterinarians may recommend a COVID-19 vaccine for dogs that are at high risk of exposure, such as dogs that work in healthcare settings or that live in households with immunocompromised people. Therefore, the decision of whether or not to vaccinate your dog against COVID-19 is a personal one. You should talk to your veterinarian to weigh the risks and benefits of vaccination and make the best decision for your pet. Woof, woof, am I right? Okay, anyway, I then asked Bard whether ants should be vaccinated against COVID-19. Bard said, there is no current recommendation for ants to get vaccinated against COVID-19. However, some scientists are exploring the possibility of using COVID-19 vaccines to protect ants from other diseases. Look at that vax. It can potentially save ants. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to vaccinate ants against COVID-19 is a complex one that will need to be made on a case-by-case basis. I then asked Bard about vaccinating dragons. I expected Bard to admonish me that dragons are imaginary creatures. Instead, Bard said, whether or not dragons should be vaccinated against COVID-19 is a complex question that depends on a number of factors, including the severity of the COVID-19 pandemic in dragons, the availability of a safe and effective vaccine, and the cost of vaccination. There is no scientific evidence that dragons can contract COVID-19. However, some experts believe that it is possible that dragons could be susceptible to the virus, especially if they have come into contact with humans or other animals that are infected with COVID-19. It is a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine were available for dragons. It could be beneficial to vaccinate them, as it could help to protect them from the virus and reduce the risk of them spreading it to other dragons or humans. However, the cost of vaccinating dragons would likely be high, and it is not clear if there is a large enough demand for such a vaccine to make it economically viable. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to vaccinate dragons against COVID-19 is a difficult one that would need to be made on a case-by-case basis. There is no easy answer, and the decision would likely depend on a number of factors, including the severity of the COVID-19 pandemic in dragons, the availability of a safe and effective vaccine, and the cost of vaccination. If you are considering vaccinating your dragon against COVID-19, you should talk to your veterinarian to discuss the risks and benefits of vaccination and make the best decision for your dragon. Okay, so that should give writers a sigh of relief, as Bard thinks there are people out there with pet dragons. Anyway, since we deal with spirits here on the Joe King Show, I asked Bard whether spirits should get vaccinated. While Bard acknowledged that spirits don't have physical bodies and aren't living organisms, and therefore there is no need for them to get vaxxed, it did say something else interesting. However, it is important to note that spirits can be carriers of the virus. This means that they can transmit the virus to humans, even though they themselves are not affected by it. For this reason, it is important for humans to take precautions to protect themselves from COVID-19, such as social distancing, wearing masks, and washing their hands frequently. If you are concerned about the health of your spirit, you can consult with a spiritual advisor or other expert in the field. They may be able to offer you guidance on how to protect your spirit from the negative effects of COVID-19, such as stress or anxiety. Wow, according to Bard, the spiritual realm can transmit COVID-19. How about that? I better be careful. King walks off stage and onto another stage and sits in a seat behind a desk and says, "Please welcome to the program one of the most famous women of all time, the fearless Joan of Arc." Joan of Arc emerges from behind a curtain and waves at the audience. Applause, applause, applause. Joan walks across the stage and sits in a seat next to King's desk. King, "Welcome to the program, Joan." Joan, "Thank you for having me." King, "Now you were born in 1412 in France to Jacques and Isabel?" Joan, "Correct." King, "Now your father was a peasant farmer who supplemented the family income as a village official, collecting taxes and a member of the local watch. Now was that like the Night's Watch?" Joan, "The Night's Watch?" King, "You know, from Game of Thrones." Joan, "I'm not familiar with Game of Thrones." King, "You're not familiar with Game of Thrones? You're a regular aria, for Christ's sake. Anyway, when you were 13 during the 100 Years' War between England and France, the English attacked your area and cattle were stolen, and this led to the sentiment among the villagers that the English must be expelled from France to achieve peace." Joan, "Yes, and it was around these times that I had my first vision of St. Michael, surrounded by angels who appeared to me in the garden. I wept because I wanted them to take me with them." King, "Very good. Now throughout your life, you purported to have visions of St. Michael." Joan, "Yes, I often had them when the church bells were rung. I also had visions of St. Margaret and St. Catherine, and I swore an oath of virginity to these voices." King, "Okay, so you never had any sexual relations?" Joan, "Correct." King, "Not even any oral or hand stuff?" Joan, "Correct." King, "Now when you were talking with these spirits, did you ever think about starting a sketch comedy show with them, or otherwise a talk show where you gave a monologue in the beginning?" Joan, "No, I did not." King, "Okay, so I'm the first then. Very good. Now, during your youth, there was a prophecy that France would be saved by a virgin maiden, and you told people that you were that virgin maiden." Joan, "Correct." King, "Okay, now in 1428 you asked your uncle to take you to the town of Vaucouleurs, where you petitioned the town commander, Robert de Baudricourt, for an armed escort to the Armagnac court at Chinon." Joan, "Yes, but Robert refused and sent me home. But then the next year my home was raided by Burgundy forces, which set fire to the town, destroyed the crops, and forced me, my family, and the other townspeople to flee. So I returned to Robert, who refused me again. But by this time I had gained the support of two of Robert's soldiers, Joan de Metz and Bertrand de Polonais." King, "Very good. Meanwhile, you were summoned by Charles II, Duke of Lorraine, because he had heard of you and thought you might have supernatural powers to cure him of his ills." Joan, "Yes, I offered him no cures, but reprimanded him for living with his mistress. Around this time, my visions told me to leave. Robert agreed to a third meeting, and I convinced him to allow me to go to Chinon for a meeting with the Dauphin." King, "Very good. And you wore men's clothes on this journey and ended up wearing men's clothes for the remainder of your life?" Joan, "Correct." King, "So in a way you were a pioneer for the trans movement?" Joan, "You can say that." King, "Very good. So you then got to meet the King of France, Charles VII? Joan, "Yes, I was 17. I told him I was there to help him dispel the English, and I made quite an impression on him." King, "Okay, you were then inspected to ensure that you were indeed a virgin and could be the prophesied virgin savior?" Joan, "Yes. King. Okay, and then you were given plate armor and had your own banner design. Joan. Yes, I went by the name Joan the Maiden at the time, emphasizing my virginity as a sign of my mission. I outraised the morale of the French, inspiring devotion and the hope of divine assistance. It helped turn what was a war over inheritance into a religious war. I even sent a letter to the English rulers that I had been sent by God to drive them out of France. King. Very good. Kind of like the Blues Brothers who were on a mission from God. Joan. I'm not familiar with these Blues Brothers. King. Never mind. Anyway, you then joined the battlefield in Orleans and rallied troops around you and helped them go on the offensive. Joan. Yes, my offensive led to the recapture of Saint-Jean-le-Blanc. The other commanders wanted to stop, but I insisted we continue and launch an assault on Les Augustiniens. After that capture, the other commanders wanted to stop again, but I again insisted on continuing the offensive. And though I was wounded by an arrow between my neck and shoulder, we were successful and able to get the English to retreat completely from Orleans. King. Very good. You then went on a campaign to recapture the Loire towns. Joan. Yes, we were successful, although I began scaling a siege ladder with my banner in hand, but was struck down by a stone which split my helmet. Okay. And from there, you and the forces won the Battle of Patay, which led to Charles's coronation as King of France. Joan. Yes, I was given a place of honor at the ceremony and announced that God's will had been fulfilled. King. Very good. You then went to recapture Paris. Joan. Yes, I was injured in the leg by a crossbow bolt, and we suffered heavy casualties. We were unable to capture it, and Charles ordered an end to the assault. I was displeased and argued the attack should continue. However, Charles dismantled a bridge approaching Paris that was necessary for the attack, and we were forced to retreat. King. That's too bad, and from there your role in the French court diminished? Joan. Yes, after the defeat, the court lost faith in me, and some argued we were unable to take Paris because my inspiration wasn't divine. King. And from there was a temporary truce made, but you decided to execute more sieges over towns that had been recaptured by the English despite the truce, without Charles's approval, and eventually you were captured. Joan. Yes. King. You were then put on trial by the English for heresy, accused of having blasphemed by wearing men's clothes, of acting upon visions that were demonic, and of refusing to submit your words and deeds to the church because you claimed you would be judged by God alone. Joan. Correct. King. Now, despite no legal counsel, history shows you held your own during the trial, but it was stacked against you in a foregone conclusion, after which you were executed by burning for heresy after they said you failed to be rehabilitated. Joan. That is correct. King. And as terrible of an ending as you had to your life, France ultimately was able to dispel the English from their country, and you eventually became a national symbol of pride for the French, and were canonized as a saint and martyr. Joan. Yes, I couldn't be happier with how history has ultimately judged me and my actions. King. Well, we want to thank you for being on the show. You're truly one of the bravest people, man or woman, who has ever lived, and I'm honored I had the chance to talk with you. Joan. Thank you very much. King. Joan of Arc, everybody. Applause, applause, applause. King. That's all the time we have for this show, but tune in the next one where we interview another deceased guest. Until then, I'm Joe King, and I'm not joking.